Some things you can't unfeel. That's the part nobody warns you about. You can make all the right decisions, keep all the right distances, tell yourself exactly why something isn't a good idea, and none of that changes what's already happening underneath. When Jace told me he'd be there at 9, he didn't ask, he didn't offer. He just said it, like it was already decided, and then walked out before I could respond. And I spent the rest of that night trying to figure out if that was a man being professional or a man telling me something he didn't have the words for yet. I still didn't have an answer by morning. What I did have was a discharge bag, a list of restrictions I was already planning to partially ignore, and the very specific feeling of someone who has just realized that leaving a place isn't going to be as clean as she thought. Because here's the thing about Jace Harmon. He wasn't supposed to matter. He was supposed to be the surgeon who fixed my heart and sent me home. That was the whole story. Except it wasn't, and we both knew it. Before we get into part 2, if you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe. It genuinely means everything to this channel, and it's the reason we can keep making stories like this one. Leave a like if part 1 kept you hooked, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We read every single one. Now let's get back to Claire and Jace. Because part 2 is where everything starts to cost something. Let's go. He was there at 9. Not 9:15, not 9:05. 9 exactly. Which told me something about him that I filed away without meaning to. I was already dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed when he walked in, and for a second we just looked at each other, with the particular awkwardness of two people who had been honest with each other in the dark, and now had to figure out what that meant in the daylight. He was in regular clothes for the first time. Dark jacket, simple shirt, nothing remarkable, but it changed things in a way I hadn't anticipated. Without the scrubs and the badge, and the whole architecture of his professional identity, he was just a man. A very composed, very guarded man, but still. He picked up my bag from the chair without asking, and I didn't argue. We walked out together through the corridor, and I noticed the nurses at the station tracking us with the kind of carefully neutral expressions that meant they were absolutely paying attention. I didn't look at them. Neither did he. Outside it was cold and gray, a typical Chicago morning that couldn't decide between winter and something worse. He had a black car parked at the curb, and he opened the passenger door, and I got in and told myself this was just practical, that I had told my sister not to come, and I had no one else to call, and this was simply a man being responsible about a patient's discharge. I almost made it through the whole ride believing that. He drove the way he did everything, quietly and without wasted movement. I gave him my address, and he put it in the GPS, and after a few minutes of silence, I asked him if he did this for all his patients, and he said no. Just that. No. I looked out the window. Then why? I said. It wasn't really a question. Or maybe it was, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to respond. Then he said, "Because you knocked on the window." I turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "That's it?" I said. "You knocked," he said, "and I went in, and I shouldn't have." And then everything after that was a consequence of that one decision. His jaw was tight, not angry, just honest in the way that costs something. I understood what he was saying. He wasn't talking about regret exactly. He was talking about cause and effect, about a man who had built his entire life around controlled outcomes, acknowledging that one small moment had introduced a variable he hadn't accounted for. That variable was me. He pulled up outside my building and put the car in park, and we sat there for a moment with the engine running and Chicago moving around us, indifferent and loud. I should have thanked him and gotten out, That would have been the clean version of this. Instead, I turned to him and said, "Do you want to come up for coffee?" He looked at me then, really looked, and the silence before his answer was the longest 10 seconds of my entire recovery. He said yes. I don't know which one of us was more surprised. My apartment was exactly as I had left it 4 days ago, which meant it looked like someone had been interrupted mid-crisis. There was a half-empty moving box in the corner that I hadn't gotten around to unpacking, a blanket on the couch that didn't match anything, and on the kitchen counter, a stack of Daniel's mail I had been meaning to forward and kept not doing. I was suddenly very aware of all of it. I moved through the space, picking up the most obvious evidence of my recent chaos, while Jace stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the street below. He didn't comment on the box or the mail. He just stood there looking at the city, like he was comfortable being still in spaces that belonged to other people. I made coffee, because I had said I would, and it gave my hands something to do. He came and sat at the kitchen counter while I worked, and it was so unexpectedly domestic that I had to concentrate on the coffee maker to avoid thinking about it too directly. "Your plant is dead," he said. I looked at the windowsill. He was right. The small succulent I had owned for 2 years had not survived my absence, which felt like a metaphor I didn't have the energy to unpack. "I told my sister not to come," I said. "It was 4 days. Plants don't negotiate." I laughed. It surprised both of us, I think, because he looked at me with that almost smile again, the one that did something inconvenient to my concentration. I set his coffee in front of him and leaned against the counter on the opposite side, and we drank in the kind of quiet that should have been uncomfortable and wasn't. After a while, he looked around the apartment slowly, the way he had looked at my chart the first night, reading the details. His eyes stopped on the drafting table in the corner, covered in project sketches. "Are those current?" he asked. "One of them. The others I've been avoiding." "Why?" I wrapped both hands around my mug. "Because they're for a client who reminds me of every decision I made in the last 4 years, and I'm not ready to sit with that yet." He nodded like he understood that specifically, not just generally, like a man who also had things he was not ready to sit with. I noticed the way he was holding his coffee cup, both hands, same as me, and I thought about how strange it was that we had developed these small parallel habits in less than a week, without either of us trying. He set his cup down after a moment, and looked at me with an expression that was more open than anything I had seen from him before. Not vulnerable exactly, just less defended. He said, "I haven't been in someone's apartment in a long time." I held his gaze. "How long?" He considered that with the same precision he applied to everything. "Long enough that this feels different than it should." The space between us across that counter was maybe 3 feet. It felt much smaller than that. I was very aware of his hands on the surface between us, close enough that closing that distance would have required almost no effort at all. Neither of us moved, but neither of us looked away either. He moved first, not toward me, which is what every nerve in my body was anticipating. He picked up his coffee cup, walked around the counter, and stopped in front of the drafting table. He stood there looking at the sketches with his hands in his pockets and his back to me, and I had to remind myself to breathe normally. "Which one is the project you're avoiding?" he asked. I came to stand beside him, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him in the cool apartment. I pointed to the large floor plan on the right, a residential build for a couple who had been together for 20 years and wanted a home that reflected who they were now, not who they had been when they started. I had been designing around their history without meaning to, and it made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't fully articulate yet. He studied it for a moment. "You design around how people move through spaces," he said. It wasn't a question. That's the whole job, I said. Most people think architecture is about how things look. It's actually about how things feel from the inside. He turned his head slightly to look at me. We were standing close enough that the movement brought his face near mine, and for a second, neither of us adjusted the distance. I could see the detail of his eyes at this range, the gray that wasn't flat at all but layered, like weather. That's what surgery is, he said quietly. Everyone thinks it's technical. It is. But what you're actually doing is giving someone back the feeling of being inside their own body without fear. I hadn't thought about it that way before. I also couldn't think particularly clearly at that specific moment, because he still hadn't moved back, and neither had I. He looked at the sketch again, and I looked at the side of his face, and I thought about the night before my surgery, the 40 minutes of silence that had been enough, and I understood something I hadn't quite articulated before. This man did not do small things. Every choice he made, including the ones that looked like nothing, was deliberate. Him being here was deliberate. Him standing this close was deliberate. And he was waiting for something, though I wasn't sure he would have admitted that if I asked. I turned toward him. He turned at the same moment, and the distance collapsed to something that required a decision. His hand came up slowly, and his fingers touched my jaw, just barely. A contact so light it could have been accidental, except that nothing about Jace Harmon was accidental. My breath caught. His eyes moved from mine to my mouth and back, and the quality of his expression in that moment was the most unguarded I had ever seen him. All that careful distance, all that precision, and underneath it, something that had clearly been there for days, patient and contained, and now very close to the surface. He said my name. Just that. Claire. And then his phone rang. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he stepped back and answered it, and I stood at my drafting table with my heart doing something my repaired valve had absolutely nothing to do with. The call was short. He stepped into the hallway near my front door, and I stayed at the drafting table and pretended to look at the sketches while I listened to his voice without being able to make out the words. His tone was different on the phone, clipped and authoritative, fully Dr. Harmon again in a matter of seconds. I thought about how quickly he could do that, reassemble all that distance like a coat he kept just inside the door. He came back into the kitchen and said there was a situation at the hospital, a post-op patient with complications, and he needed to go. I said of course, and meant it. He picked up his jacket from the back of the counter stool, and I walked him to the door, and we stood in the small entryway of my apartment with about 18 inches between us, and the particular awareness of two people who had just been interrupted at a very specific moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," I said. "It's your job." He nodded, but he didn't move immediately, and I could tell he was working through something, some internal calculation that involved more variables than just leaving. "I want to see you again," he said finally. It came out more direct than I think he intended, with less of his usual careful framing, and I could see that he noticed it too, because something flickered across his face right after. Not regret, more like a man surprised by his own honesty. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at him. "That's going to be complicated," I said. "I know. You were my surgeon 4 days ago. I know that too. And you're standing here telling me anyway." He met my eyes steadily. Yes. There was nothing performative about the way he said it. No charm, no deflection. Just a man stating a fact and accepting the weight of it. I thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. I had just ended a 4-year relationship. I was 6 weeks from being cleared for normal activity. I was emotionally unsteady in ways I hadn't fully mapped yet. And he was clearly carrying something significant from his past that he hadn't told me about, and might not for a long time. All of that was real. All of that mattered. I reached out and touched his hand, briefly, just my fingers against his knuckles, the lightest possible contact. His hand turned slightly under mine, not grabbing, just acknowledging. "Okay," I said. Something in his expression shifted then, quiet and deep, like a room where someone has just turned on a light that had been off for a very long time. He left, and I closed the door and stood with my back against it for a moment, listening to the sound of his footsteps in the hallway outside. Then I went to the window and watched his car pull away from the curb below. And I thought about a surgeon who had built his life around not feeling things and had just told me, plainly and without decoration, that he wanted to see me again. I didn't know his whole story yet, but I knew enough to understand that for him, those 5 words had cost something real, and that made them matter more than anything elaborate ever could have. He texted that evening. Nothing romantic, nothing that could be misread, just, "Complication resolved. How are you feeling?" I stared at it for longer than was reasonable. It was such a Jace thing to do. Check on the practical before the personal, lead with the clinical, and let the rest exist underneath. I wrote back, "Better than this morning. Your patient okay?" He replied within a minute, "She will be." Then, after a pause that I watched in real time, I meant what I said. I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and thought about the specific danger of a man who says exactly what he means and nothing more. We texted sporadically over the next 4 days. Nothing sustained, nothing that built into long conversations, just these brief exchanges that felt like checking in on something without naming what it was. He asked about my recovery once. I asked about his hours. He sent me an article about a new structural technique in cardiac repair that was so unexpectedly thoughtful, I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't projecting. On the 5th day, he called. Not texted, called, which felt significant in the way small things do when you're paying attention. He asked if I was up for a walk, said the activity would be good for me, which was technically true, and also transparently an excuse, and I appreciated both things equally. We met at a park 2 blocks from my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, when Chicago had briefly decided to behave, cold but clear, the lake visible from the path as a flat silver line in the distance. He was already there when I arrived, hands in his jacket pockets, watching a dog chase something near the tree line, with the focused patience of a man who had learned to occupy waiting. He looked different outside the hospital, outside my apartment, in actual daylight with the city around him, more human somehow, though that wasn't quite the right word. More present, maybe, like the context of the real world made him easier to read. We walked for a while without much pressure. He asked about a project I had mentioned, and I told him about it in more detail than I planned to, and he listened the way he did everything, completely, without interrupting. I asked about the hospital, and he gave me more than his usual one-line answers, which felt like something. At a certain point, the path curved toward a bench overlooking the water, and we sat without discussing it, and the silence was comfortable in that particular way that only happens with very few people. After a while, he said, "I have to tell you something." His tone had shifted, not dramatically, but enough. I looked at him. His jaw was set, and he was watching the water, and there was something in his posture that reminded me of the night before my surgery. That quality of a man standing at the edge of something he had been avoiding for a long time. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," he said. "That's not why I'm doing it." He turned to look at me then, and his expression was open in a way I hadn't seen before, without any of the usual careful management. Whatever he was about to say, he had decided. And that decision was already costing him something. He told me about her on that bench with the lake in front of us and the wind coming in low and steady off the water. Her name was Sarah. She had been his patient first, then something more, which he said with the particular flatness of a man describing something he had examined so many times, it had lost its texture. She had a condition he had monitored for 2 years before it became critical. He had operated. He had done everything correctly, every decision defensible, every step clean. She died on the table anyway. Not because of a mistake, because sometimes the body decides, and no amount of precision changes that. He said he had spent a long time after that believing the problem was feeling something in the first place. That if he had stayed behind the professional line, her death would have been a loss he could carry differently, more cleanly. I didn't say anything for a moment. The wind moved through the bare trees above us, and somewhere behind us, a kid was laughing at something, and the ordinary world kept going the way it does, regardless of what people are sitting with. "That's not how it works," I said finally. "I know that now," he said. "I didn't for a long time." He was looking at his hands. I reached over and covered them with mine, both hands, no hesitation this time, and he went very still. "I'm not her," I said. "I know who you are." He turned his hands over slowly and held mine, and we sat like that for a while, without needing to say anything else. On the walk back, he stayed close, our shoulders occasionally touching. And at the corner near my building, he stopped and turned toward me with that expression I had come to recognize as him making a decision he had already made, but needed a moment to commit to out loud. He cupped my face in both hands, the same hands that had repaired my heart 6 weeks ago, and kissed me. It was quiet and deliberate and warm, and it tasted like coffee and cold air, and everything that had been building since a woman knocked on a hospital window at midnight for no reason she could fully explain. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine for a moment, and I felt him exhale, slow and complete, like a man setting something down that he had been carrying for 6 years. "I don't know how to do this carefully," he said. "Neither do I said. "So we figure it out." He pulled back enough to look at me. Then he nodded once and took my hand, and we walked the rest of the way together without letting go. If this story moved you even a little, drop a number from 1 to 10 in the comments. It genuinely helps us understand what resonates and keeps these stories coming. Thank you for spending this time with Claire and Jace. It means more than you know.